Okay, so let's look at this. You should be opening to rereading. You should be open to rereading and finding depth. And we're going to talk about part 2 of this. So let's look at this. You recognize it from the other day where we did it with the images. How many of you guys chose this guy? Okay. Who chose this one? Who chose this one? Okay, so when we think about this, we're noticing that we had to look multiple times at something in order for us to really get down. We noticed some of our earlier responses were important to build on later, but if we looked at them by themselves, they were really kind of surface level or superficial observations. Maybe we noticed the basic element, but we didn't notice the purpose of it or how it affected the poem or our picture in that case, which is what we're going to look at today, how it affects a poem. And so today we're going to be looking at this continuum, but we're going to be doing it with a poem instead of a picture. So first I'd like you to scroll down to the poem in red, okay? And the poem in red is called Explaining My Depression to My Mother, a Conversation. Now, we are going to look at this whole thing a little bit later, but for the purpose of going through it, we're just going to focus on the first part today. So, just so you're not confused, and you can look at it after class, or you can look at it later when we do it together, I just want you to cross off the second part right now, just so that you can look at and focus in on this part in class, and we can practice this technique. So make sure you have that crossed off. Yeah, you can look at it later. So, we're going to go through this with the chart. Just like we do with the pictures, I'm going to read it to you or show it to you, and we're going to think about what we notice, we're going to think about what we hear when we hear the poem out loud or what we see in it, but also not just what we notice, but what we're wondering, what connections we make in that. So we're going to write those after we view it each time on our chart. So now you guys have crossed this off, right? Are we there? Okay. So you've already crossed that off. I'm going to go through this. And you're not going to be on this chart yet, but that's where we're going to put our responses. Okay, so we're going to start with this first one. It says, Explaining My Depression to My Mother. Now, I want you to be thinking about what you notice. You may write on it, you may make notes if you want, but just kind of going through the first time. What pops out at you? What are you noticing? What are you wondering? Explaining my depression to my mother. A conversation. Mom, my depression is a shapeshifter. One day it's as small as a firefly in the palm of a bear. The next... All right, so we're on part 1 now. We've already listened to the poem once and gone through it. Your job is now, what did you notice? What were you wondering? What were you thinking in our first viewing or our first iteration of this? So you're going to make your notes in here. I'm going to give you guys about 45 seconds or so. And I'll put you on the timer. What were you noticing? What were you thinking? If you want to go back and look at it, you can. Begin. All right, so we've finished. You guys have your notes on your chart. We're going to go back and read it again because as we know from before when we looked at this, we ended up having a lot more information on our pictures each time we checked them out. We got some ideas in the beginning and built on those. We were able to look at some things that were a little bit deeper. So we're going to do it again. So we're going to go through this again. Make sure you have this all crossed off still. Keep it that way. Explaining my depression to my mother. A conversation. Mom, my depression is a shapeshifter. One day it is as small as a firefly in the palm of a bear. The next, it's the bear. On those days, I play dead until the bear leaves me alone. Okay, so let's pause for a second. We've done our first viewing and our second viewing. Okay? I'd like for you guys now to pause on this for just 1 minute and scroll back to your poetry continuum. Scroll back to your poetry continuum that looks like this. Now, we've already practiced with this with a piece of art, but I want you guys to think about the difference in the scenarios. If I ask you to wait outside my room, and I say, okay, come in now. Tell me the things you think. Okay, and you guys aren't really sure where to go with that. You guys are like, okay, now what if I say, okay, go outside my room.
You're teaching someone.
Now come in and look for things that are red.
You're looking for something.
Okay, immediately you're looking for something. You know what to search for. So what I would like for you guys to do before we read it this next time is I'd like for you to go back to this continuum. We found that our earlier times, we were finding some superficial observations. Maybe we can use those to build on some things in category 3 or 4 or 5. So what I'd like for you to do now is the same idea of coming in with something to look for. I'd like for you to look in the third, the fourth, and the fifth category. And I'd like for you to circle maybe 2 or 3 things that you want to really search for in this poem to see if it's there when we read it the next times. Okay? So maybe you say, I really know what this is, so I'm going to look for that specifically. Or, oh, I think I noticed a little bit about this, so I'm going to look for that next time. Or, I haven't really ever thought to look for this thing, so I'm going to look for this thing and see if it's there. I'd like for you to pick 3. If you're looking at something and you don't know what it is, ask, don't just circle it. Okay? So, pick out 2 or 3 of these that you can circle, that you can have an idea of what to look for when we go into the poem in just a second. I'm going to give you guys about 30 or 45 seconds right now to choose those. Okay, before we start to look for these, I'd like for you guys to verbalize to your neighbor. So if you're at tables of 4, turn to do 2 and 2s. Okay? I'd like for you to verbalize to your neighbor what it is that you're going to be looking for. Meaning, hey, and this time when we read it, I'm going to be looking for blah, 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 which means, so you're not just going to say, I'm looking for style. You're going to say, what is style, blah, blah, blah. You're not just going to say, oh, I'm looking for social connections. What does that mean? You're going to verbalize it to your neighbor, what you're specifically looking for in this next reading. You guys turn with your partners. I'm going to give you guys about 1 minute to do that. All right, so we have verbalized. I'm going to wait for you guys. We have verbalized. We are ready to go back to our poem. Okay, so this is called, I'm going to wait for you guys. This is called, as you've heard now for a couple of times already, Explaining My Depression to My Mother, a Conversation. You should be on this part following along. Here we go. Mom, my depression is a shapeshifter. One day to think about the things that you were specifically looking for and put that in your next viewing. We've already got some viewings up here. What were you specifically looking for that you verbalized to your neighbor? And go back and look at that note if you want to see what you circled and remind yourself. See if you can focus your observations, what you thought, what you saw, what you noticed on that. Okay, so let's pause here for a minute. Find a place to stop on your notes if you haven't already. So we're going to go back up to the poetry continuum. And I want you to look again at your notes, see what you circled, whether you circled this or this or this, and see what it is that you are specifically looking for as we go through our next reading. What are the things you are specifically trying to notice that are a little bit deeper than the things we maybe started with? Okay? Think about that. When you're ready, go down to follow along with the poem. Okay, here we go. Explaining my depression to my mother, a conversation. Mom, my depression is a shapeshifter. One day it is as small as a firefly in the palm of a bear. The next, it's the bear. So we have 4 viewings done. We're not going to finish the 5th one because we're going to run out of time, so I want to have a little bit of time to get to the next part. So here's what I would like for you to think about. I'm going to give you guys the printout of the poetry continuum so that you can have it next to you and not scroll back and forth, okay? So I'm going to give it to you, and I want you to be on where all of your responses were. So look at where all of your responses were. I know we don't have 5. But I'd like for you to score yourself. Thank you. I'd like for you to score yourself, thinking about how far did I get in my first one? Was it some of the superficial responses that we talked about initially? Did I get stronger as I went down, especially once I thought about what I was looking for in the poem? Okay? So I'd like for you guys to kind of score yourself on these. And when you score yourself, you need to be able to explain why. If you give yourself a 2, you need to be able to say, I gave myself a 2 because this part that I wrote shows this part on a continuum.
Verbally or
We're going to verbally explain it in just a minute. Okay? So you need to be able to do that and know why, because you're going to verbalize that to your neighbors. So look at your poetry continuum. It's the same one that you have side by side, and score your 4 different responses. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here's what I'd like for you to do. At your tables again, you're going to divide in 2s. You're now going to verbalize what you think was your lowest score and what you think was your highest score. So maybe you found yourself giving a 2, a 1, a 3, and a 4. So you're going to pick your lowest, go, that's my lowest, that's my highest. But you're not just going to say, oh, I gave myself a 1, I gave myself a 4. You're going to verbalize on your sheet what that means. So, I gave myself a 1 because I wrote blah, 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 and that was an example of which one of these things, or why you thought it was that example. And if your partner, in telling you that, if you're listening and you think, I don't think that's really a 1, I think it's a 2, or I don't think it's really a 4, I think it's a 3, that's okay to tell them. Explain it. Okay? It's better that we do it now in practice than you do it on your own later when we're having a strong grade with it. This is our practice time. Okay? So you're going to talk about your lowest scoring one and why you think it was that, and that's okay because those are things we can always build on, and what your highest scoring one was with your neighbor. So divide into your 2s right now at your table.
What was yours?
Okay, begin. Okay, if you're listening, clap once. If you're listening, clap twice. Okay. So, I know we're not quite done with the class. We're actually going to shift gears to something else. But before we finish this part of the lesson, I would like for you to open your email. I would like for you to open your email. Okay, in your email, I'm going to wait for you guys to get quiet. In your email, I would like for you to email me at the regular account, not the student one. I'd like for you to email me 2 things inside this email. The first email is something you learned about this particular poem. And the second one is something that you learned about when you look at poems or when you look at poetry. Okay, so I'm going to say that again while you're writing. Something you learned about this particular poem, and you might want to look back at your notes. What notes did you take? And something you learned about what you do when you look at poetry. 2 things. You need to email me all in the same email. Something you do when you look at poetry is the second one. And the first one is something about this particular poem. 2 things inside the email. 2 things. All right, so we're going to switch gears. If you're listening, say I. If you're listening, say tooth. If you're listening, say nose. Okay, so I would like for you guys to be on the thing that you downloaded today already called Poetry Scavenger Hunt. Called Poetry Scavenger Hunt. So, there are 2 poems in there. We're only going to have time to start the first one right now. But in it, I'm asking you to use the poetry terms that we were discussing all last week. We also did the Nearpod lesson on them. You have the notes already in your notebook, your notability. But I have printed for you guys to leave on the desks these so you don't have to click back and forth, okay? Just in case you need a reminder. So your job is, it tells you what you're going to be finding, but if you look on each poem, it tells you specifically which ones. So it tells you how many and what you need to do. So you're going to be working with a partner. So at your tables, you need to turn to your 2s again. Turn to your 2s. And you need to be thinking about what you have to find in these poems. Please look at the first one, the box at the bottom. It will tell you. So when you are ready, you may start with your partner. I'm going to come around and give you guys these note sheets. So this is all about the things that we were learning last week. You now have notes on too. And you now need to go into the poem and try to find them. Okay? So right now we're just looking for the pieces of these literary terms, and then we're going to talk about with this poem how we can use them later.